Okay, so the book we're going to be talking about today, Parson's Tale, translated. Taken from Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, translated by Mary Farrell Pomerleau.
Pomerleau.
Yeah, and
She married a French Canadian, though you can tell she was Irish.
and forward by Charles Coulombe.
Oh boy, he's got an old crank.
But so I read this book about 10 years ago, and the thing the main takeaway I had from it was how strict the parson is, or the priest, his approach to Catholicism. It was so rigorous compared to our current approach. I remember specifically one of the things he said was he was talking about clothing and fashion, and he was saying that it was sinful if you wore clothing that was too fancy because there was too much vain labor, wasteful labor going on in making of your clothing, so that it was a sin to wear these types of clothes. So I guess I kind of have a multiple question. One, did medieval priests really behave? Did they talk like this?
Well, some of them did. One of the things you got to bear in mind, the reason why the Parson's Tale was published is because it is almost never translated into modern English. Well, usually when you pick up a modern English copy of the Canterbury Tales, it's given a summary, and the summary doesn't really say what it's about.
Right.
The truth is that the three classes, noblemen, clergy, and commoners of medieval society, are all skewered in the Canterbury Tales. And one of the ways that he skewers them is by having a virtuous representative of each. So, for the nobility, most of whom are represented are just, silly, but not the knight, who is the epitome of a very parfait gentleman.
Yeah.
The commoners, same. They're all out to lunch, except the franklin, who is the brother of the one clergyman who's not out to lunch. It's the parson. Now, and this goes back once again to Mr. Dufault. Medieval society, made up of Catholics, nevertheless had its own share of horrors and sins. And Chaucer makes fun of them, which is a more effective way of condemning them, I think, than just saying they're bad.
Yeah.
But the parson, he brings it all to a point, and he makes sense out of it all. The fashions of that time, some of them were very strange. They liked, men's hose were very tight in the rear, and the rear was very often colored with garish colors.
Yeah, we were talking about this before. He talked like a baboon's.
Yeah, he says it makes it look like a baboon's rear.
Yeah.
And it says, why would you want to attract attention to that part of your body whence come foul smells and so forth? We don't dress that way, but we have our own fashions that are equivalently as strange. Why do we tattoo ourselves? Why do we run around with bare midriffs, especially if we're fat? I mean, it's one thing if you've got a taut stomach to be running around with a bare midriff. But if you've got a gut and that thing's hanging out, I speak from experience, don't do that to people. It's wrong. It's aesthetically displeasing. A lot of the specifics in the Parson's Tale are specific to medieval society, but the general principles carry on throughout. And of course, one of them is that you have to expect more from the clergy than from the laity. He summarizes this by saying, for if iron should rust, or if gold should rust, what can poor iron do?
Ah, yes. That's
referred to the clergy and the laity. And see, all of that stuff is timeless, it's perennial. Were they all as strict as he? No, they weren't. But he presents his parson as the ideal. It's just like today, if you were to do a similar story, like a pilgrimage to Lourdes or something, and you had a bunch of people from the Catholic world, it was the same thing. Some priests would have faith, some wouldn't. Some nuns would be pretty devout and sane, Others would be, sisters of creation.
Okay.
And that it's the same thing. If you ever go on an open retreat to a religious house, and not a very conservative religious house, but the kind where you'll have a real cross section of Catholics, you think you're in the middle of the Canterbury Tales again, because everyone's got their own story. And a few of them are quite together, and a lot of them sound a little bit crazy, but that's humanity. And Chaucer managed to do in the Canterbury Tales, in one book, what Shakespeare did in the whole of his work, which was to capture the many types of people in the time and place they lived in.
So, okay. So, what about his actual, what he preached on fashion? So, do you think there should be some mindfulness, like if you wear brand name clothing? I mean, is that a sin? Because it's
look, I don't know if it's a sin, but I think it's ridiculous for you to spend extra money on ripped designer jeans when you can get the same effect with a cheap pair at home. Just take a knife to them and see what happens. I think that some of us tend to put too much attention to fashion. If you're spending a lot of money that could go to something else, that's the equivalent of labor going into vain labor.
Oh, yeah, right.
The equivalent is wasting money.
Ah, that's true.
And you're wasting money on what? What price fashion? Well, it depends on what you're buying. The truth of the matter is that if you buy good, conservative clothing that'll last, you don't have to spend as much money as if you're trying to be on the latest magazine. It's like, the width of ties, all right? This tie is really not terribly thin the way they were when I was little, nor is it fat the way they were when I was a teenager. It's midway.
Uh-huh.
Every now and then, it is completely and totally in fashion. But it's never so far out of fashion that it looks weird.
Ah.
And that I think, it's... Now, that's men's fashions, women's fashions. Gosh, I mean, you think back to the 30s, or the 40s, or the 50s. Gosh, they knew how to dress. And now they don't. Now it's these jeans and just horrible stuff.
Right.
Recently, I put on my what do you call it? Oh, Zuckerberg's thing, Facebook. The picture of my mother and my Aunt Jenny walking down the street in New York in the 40s. My God.
It's classic.
Oh, and that was the way people dressed.
Yeah.
Well, it's not excessive, but man, does it look good.
Yeah.
And yet, you notice also that it was very modest.
Yes, that too.
It was alluring. It certainly showed them off to their best advantage, but it wasn't slutty by any means.
Right.
I mean, you could imagine if you tried to put the make on either one of them, you'd get a razor blade in your head. No, sorry, they weren't really like that.
Uh-huh.
Well, mother was. Anyway, the point is that, in matters of taste, there should be no dispute. But having said that, if you make out of fashion an idol, then you've sinned.
I see. Okay, and before we go, this is Parson's Tale, 50% sale. It's normally $12. We're selling it for $6. Okay, so scoop it up. And if you have questions for Charles, you can contact us through the Tumblr House website, the Contact Us page. And remember, if it's Monday, it's off the menu.
So long.